In this section, we're going to be talking about major scale fingerings based on basic teaching principles of fingering and whole steps and half steps. You see, when students read a scale and just read the fingering, they're really not absorbing the scale, they're not absorbing the movement, and most of all, my experience, it doesn't stick. So I don't use any books to teach scales, I just base it on basic fingering principles. Now, before we go any further, let me mention to you that on my website at pianopki.com, you will go to the Resources tab, and the composite of the slides that are on this video are there for you to print out. So if you just want to relax and enjoy watching what's going on and then print them off later, or stop the video at this point and print off your own resource pages, that would be helpful to you so you don't have to worry about taking notes as they come up on the screen. Now, my students take these sheets that I give them with the basic fingering principles, we put them in the binder, and they have them for the rest of their life, and that's it. I've sent students along to colleges with these basic fingering principles, and they always have them at their fingertips, so to speak. Now, you know, over the years, scales and arpeggios have received a bad rap. I've heard everything from students don't like them, they're a drudgery, to teachers just feeling like they don't have time to teach them. And of course, we covered that about lesson length in the first video. So now we're going to talk about basic fingering rules, okay? And so the first slide that you're going to see now is giving you one simple principle that follows everything we're going to do today on major scales. And that is that the fourth finger in each hand plays once in each octave, and only once, and that's it. So if you know where that fourth finger goes, you're set, and then you don't have to worry about trying to keep tabs on a number of fingerings for each hand, which get jumbled up in your head. You can just spot the fourth finger. So let's look at the second slide that's coming up now, and this is Group 1 major fingering rules. Now, the beauty of this is, and you will see this when we cover minor scales in another video, between the Group 1 of the major scales and Group 1 of the minor scales, well, my goodness, you have 12 scales learned. And who wouldn't like to have that? If I had a student that transferred in with 12 scales learned, I would be delighted. So let's look at this. These are the keys of C, G, D, A, and E. Many of the common keys that are used in your first early books. And the right hand fourth finger will always play the seventh tone of the scale. The left hand always plays the second tone of the scale. And here is how I teach it. I encourage my students to think this out. For example, let me take G. So I say to my student, what's the second note of the scale? Well, that's an A. All right, in your left hand, you're only going to play A for the fourth finger. The right hand, F sharp. Now, when teaching the scale for the first time, I get the students to construct it in front of me using whole steps and half steps. So, because they learned that in book 1, whole steps and half steps. So here you are on G, and I have them say, okay, a whole step's going to be A, and then a whole step, B, and then a half step, C, whole step, D, whole step, E, whole step, F sharp, and half step, G. So what's the key signature for G? 1 sharp, F sharp. Now by doing that, they're learning how to construct it so that they can come from nowhere and always be able to figure out how many sharps they have. Hopefully, in a short period of time, those key signatures stick with them and they don't have to reconstruct the key. So I don't write out the scales for them at all. I just make sure they understand what the fingering principle is. So in doing the scale, when I'm practicing with them to get them comfortable, remember we talked about clusters in the first video? Well, one way to teach it so they get that shift in there is to do 1, 2, 3 together, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4 if you're just teaching 1 octave scales. So now you're doing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, another way to get the arm free and not have them just pinching fingers like this, which is dangerous and why many people don't like to teach scales, is to jingle bell it. I call it the jingle bell rhythm because you're going to get them loose. The second thing doing the clusters does is it gets them out of thinking 1, 2, 3, note, note, note. We don't want notes, we want a motion, a smooth motion. And by doing this, I find that now play the notes. The student is ready with that shift, and they think of it in one unit. I want my students to think one unit, okay, not 8 notes. Because the minute you do that, you're talking about a slow scale that never speeds up. Now in the left hand, they realize the thumb's on the opposite side, so now we have the grouping right under my hands. That's 1 group, 2 groups, that's it. And then they play the scale. Now, one thing I find rewarding is to go ahead and have them learn these 5 scales hands alone. By doing this, you are giving them a chance to get over the keys. They're figuring out 1 per week or 1 every other week. You're still getting this group done in a couple of months to the most. Now, one thing I learned is that people say, well, now the problem becomes, I can't get hands together without all the stumbling and fumbling. This is where that 4th finger principle comes in. First of all, before they play their scale, you're going to say, what is that 4th finger in the left? It's A. What's that 4th finger in the right? It's F sharp. It's not perfect, but it does prevent, to some extent, them going 1, 2, 3, 4 and saying, oops, no, I'm not supposed to do that. So now we have the scale. I do not attempt to put hands together on 1 octave scales until they've learned all 7. And then I have discovered over the years that a sneaky way to start getting hands together is to take this first group, because if you do contrary motion scales, the thumbs shift at the exact same time. So this is a great way to sneak in hands together. It is always also a wonderful way to sneak in contrary motion, because then you're going to learn parallel, and then we can put it together in a shortened version of the Russian scale or multi-key, multi-octave scales that is so helpful for student growth and gives you up to 10 octaves of practice. But we're working toward that 1 step at a time. So I teach these in contrary motion. Then by the time I get to parallel motion, we're pretty good. We've got that much going. They understand what contrary motion is, they understand parallel motion, and I keep that separate for quite a bit. We don't start worrying about the shortened version of a more advanced scale routine until they're at the 2 octave point. All right? So that's group 1. Now the next slide you're going to look at is group 2. Group 2 is a wonderful group because we're getting them into the black keys right away. And don't be afraid of the black keys. Often students, that's like, well, that's complicated. Actually, D flat and F sharp are a cinch. And in some cases, not with a very young child, but with someone that's a transfer student that's had almost no experience with scales, I start with group 2 because those students have been C majored and G majored to death, and it's time to move on to something else. So then I start with group 2. So here we are with group 2. What's so beautiful about group 2? The 2s, 3s play the 2 black keys, and the 2, 3, 4s play the 3 black keys. So you can do this and have a great time splashing up and down the keyboard. And they've got the basis for B, for F sharp, and for D flat. Now, let's look at B. And this again is where learning your half steps and whole steps, well, they have already done it because you've already shown them the 2 and 3 black key group. So here I am on B major. It's the same as group 1, really, but I keep it in group 2 because we're talking about something else. All right, so now we've got that scale. Okay. Now, if, and this is where I advocate us getting our students to think things a little deeper than just giving them the fingering. If 3, 2 are going to play the 2 black keys, what do they have to start with? They have to start with 4. Well, that works out just great because now 5 doesn't get a chance to play. So instead of them reading that out of a book, or you just saying you start with the 4th finger, you've already given them the why of why they're going to start with the 4th finger, and the 2s and the 3s become natural. Now, I know some teachers that actually don't even start with white key scales. They start with these because they're so intuitive. And when you go to put them hands together, the thumbs are together on E, on B, and upward. And that's a big comfort. It's an anchor. They got the anchors of the 2 blacks, the 3 blacks, and the thumbs, and they're very quick to learn. Then you move to D flat major, and you can do the same clustering we talked about in the first group. You can cluster 3, cluster 4, cluster 3, cluster 4, and instead of them punching each note like this, they can then be more encouraged to play across the keys and make something musical. So for D flat, F sharp, and B, do you see that we have an easy group to teach? If you have a transfer student that's had very little experience, I encourage you to do this. And look how easily they go to 2 octaves, because they're just so easy to learn that they're playing 2 octaves before you know it. You don't have to limit them. You can sneak that in. So you have your visual anchors, you have your clusters. Now, another reason that clustering is so important, and back in the 40s and 50s, well, actually 30s and 40s, Abby Whiteside made a big splash as a pedagogue in the United States. You've heard me mention her before in the first video. And she turned a lot of heads and caused a big flap when she said, I hate scales and arpeggios. I think they're unmusical, and I think that you shouldn't be teaching them. I'm anti-scales. You know why she was anti-scales? If you really look at her book and you really listen to what she was saying in the on piano playing, her book, you will see that what she was against was that incessant finger training in which we are punching notes out with our fingers and we're not using the arm, using the whole body to play as a mechanism. That was her first thing, was that it was anti-intuitive to being able to work with an arm guide, which every student should be doing, is guiding with their arm. And honestly, the fingers are the last thing that fire. The second problem that she pointed out is unmusical playing. And we encourage that when we let them pound out a scale. So do something with your scale from day one. Even if they're playing it very slowly, get them to crescendo up, diminuendo down. Maybe you want them to play it all staccato. Maybe you want them to play it with a hairpin, a little more up and down. Do something that makes it sound like it's a musical line so that they're not separating the scales and the arpeggios from non-musical activities. We're just learning fingering to what they're doing in their pieces. This is essential. If you're letting them play unmusically for the scales, which is very tempting to do because you're worried about whether they're getting the right fingering, then it becomes a chore, it's not fun, there's no musicianship to it, and the next thing you know, it drops by the wayside. So group 2, look how far you've come already. You've already got 6 of the 7 white keys and 2 black keys going. And you can do that in the space of, let's say, 3 to 4 months, 4 months. Well, that's starting in September, and by Christmas, you could be this far. Now let's look at group 3, our final group. So do you see that we're getting 12 major scales in 3 groups? Now look at this. Our keys are, this is the next slide, and our keys are F, B flat, E flat, A flat, and D flat. You're now covering all 5 black keys. All right? Now, the only exception in the whole 12 major keys is the F major, in which the 4th finger plays the 2nd tone of the scale instead of playing the 4th tone of the scale, as is outlined on these fingering rules. Now, pedagogue Joanne Haratunian put out a pedagogy book I'm going to say it was 3 years ago or 4 years ago now, called The 4th Finger Plays B Flat. I tell my students about that. There's a whole pedagogy book called The 4th Finger Plays B Flat. Look at this. Right hand 4th finger plays B flat for all of these, all 5. Now, you could also argue, notice that I put D flat in group 3 as well. Even though we already covered it in group 2, you can also argue the 4th finger plays B flat. I just teach it as 2 and 3 black keys because it's such an easy concept. But it follows this guideline as well. 4th finger plays B flat. So again, by now the students are better about constructing. We've probably far enough along in the theory that they've already started with the pie wheel that gives them the key signatures. And by the way, you can fuse your theory with this beautifully by simply having your wheel of a circle of fifths in their binder, and as you add the keys, you add it on your wheel. And then they have that reference of how many sharps or flats they have, in addition to being able to figure it out by the simple whole step, half step, whole step, half step. So here we are with 4th finger plays B flat. So you can cover E flat, A flat, and F at this point. You can do that even earlier. A lot of times I reach down into group 3 when I want to get all the white keys learned and just teach F then. So, but I put it here for the argument's sake. Nobody says you can't mix around the groups. So here you are with your fourth finger placed B flat. And so you see in the key of E flat, it's easier for the student to say, here we go. I've got 3 black key cluster. I have 4 black key cluster. 3 black keys, 4 black keys. And they walk in. Now, in subsequent videos, I'm going to be talking about the arm guide and the importance of the arm guide. But for argument's sake here, one thing that causes students to have a difficult time is that they play on the edge of the black keys like this. The first thing that happens when they play on the edge of the black keys is they want to twist. And that's just the worst thing you can let them do, because they're twisting that arm, and it not only is it hard and difficult to get there, but if they walk those longer fingers into the black keys, just say a third, then what you have is plenty of room to walk. Yesterday I used this. I told the student to walk over the bridge and they got it right away because they weren't getting it the way I was doing it. So it's 3, 2, 1. Now here I am, I'm walking over to the fourth finger. So I keep telling them to walk in the arm. You're walking into the blacks, and the thumb is not way out here, it's in. I tell them, stay in and snug so that you're there and you're not wandering all over the keys. Another trick is to imagine a highway on your keyboard. You're about a third of the way into the blacks, and about halfway out to the blacks, and it's this where they play, not out here. So do you see that in a space of a very relatively short period of time, I mean, even if you did this for 1 year, they would have all their major scales. Now in reality, I teach the white key majors, I teach D flat and F sharp because it's so much fun and it's easy, and then I go on to the white key minors, which is going to be covered in another video. I go ahead and do that, and by then we are well on our way. But I try to get, as far as I can, I'm going to say I probably get all the white key majors done from summer to about now, November, and then I'm already into my white key minors or D flat and F sharp. So my students that started scales over the summer will certainly by June have covered all the white key majors. They'll have them hands together 1 octave. They'll have D flat and F sharp, and we'll be into the white key minors, the harmonic form. So see how much I'm able to accomplish in a year? And if you can do that much in a year, imagine the growth in 2 years. So by using these basic principles, they can be anywhere, and by knowing the simple pattern of the scale by wholes and halves, and knowing their fourth fingers, where they go, and telling you where they go before they play, you avoid a lot of that restarting and stumbling, and you're on the side calling out the fingers, and they're not trying to think 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then having the left hand be a completely different set of numbers, which is enough to boggle anybody's mind. Just focus on the fourth finger. So that ends our segment on scales. In the next segment, the final segment of this video, we're going to talk about arpeggios. And so if you haven't printed out those resources, please do. This will be a great time for you to get that so you have it for yourself and your students. And we'll be right back.